Welcome to season 7 of Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host. The podcast took an extended hiatus over the winter, so today's episode will be about catching up. I've reassembled a panel of familiar voices to discuss the current state of the entertainment industry in the face of the ongoing pandemic. But before I introduce my guests, I want to say a few words in memory of my father, Jack Skidmore, who contracted COVID-19 in a nursing home about a week before Christmas last year and died shortly thereafter. My dad was a big part of why I got interested in film. He wasn't affiliated with the industry in any way. He spent the majority of his career in the Army and was a 30-year veteran, but he loved going to the movies. It didn't particularly matter what we saw. I think my dad just enjoyed the ritual of showing up at the theater, ordering a bucket of popcorn, and seeing a movie on the big screen. It was a Skidmore family tradition, and I miss it. Of course, the theater experience is something that many of us have been missing for more than a year now, but nonetheless, film production has spent that time rapidly adapting to the pandemic. That's what my guests are here today to discuss. Allison Choi Braun, LA-based costumer. Welcome back.
Thank you so much.
Dan Fisher, New York-based prop person and set dresser. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you again.
Katie Carroll, first assistant director. Glad you're here.
Glad to be back.
And finally, David Tuttman, New York-based director and cinematographer. Welcome.
It's good to be here. Thanks, Kid.
For listeners who may have joined us recently or long-term listeners who may need a refresher, Allison, Katie, Dan, and I originally gathered in March of 2020 to talk about the production shutdown. Tut joined us when we regrouped in June 2020 in the thick of the lockdown, and we hypothesized what it might take to get film production up and running again. Now, 9 months later, I think it's fair to say that there's been a lot of movement on that front. But before we talk about larger trends, let's have each of you tell us what you've been personally up to. Katie, how about if you kick us off?
Well, I'm currently in New York. I was getting calls in August to maybe go back to the show that I had been on in Mexico. But I wasn't sure about going back to Mexico mid-pandemic. I wasn't sure what the protocols would be. Then a friend of mine reached out and said, hey, we're starting up our show. And it's very, very COVID friendly. The vast majority of the scenes are 4 people in a room with no background on a stage, and then some winter locations. And I said, yeah, actually in New York, I figured probably more COVID friendly just because they had to deal with so much that they're going to be more safety focused. So I've been here in New York since early September, going on 6 months now.
I want to talk more about the shows that you didn't go back to as well as what you're doing now, Katie. But first, let's hear from our other panelists. Dan, tell us about what you've been doing.
Well, I believe since the last time we spoke, I finished out a very long-running season 1 of an Apple TV science fiction show that, with the pandemic hiatus, took us about a year and a half to complete 10 episodes, but we did. And then I immediately went on to do a pilot, and we just finished that on Friday, 2 days ago. And tomorrow, Monday, from this recording, I'll be starting on a new series for HBO that will take me through the summer. So busy, 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 Bob.
That's good to hear. We're going to talk more about that. David, you're also in New York. Tell us what you've been up to.
Well, I hadn't worked for pretty much a year until about 2 weeks ago, where I picked up a cinematography assignment that'll take me through early June. I'm alternating on a show, second season of the show. And it's been really interesting to pick up and shake off the rest.
I bet.
It's going nicely. So,
Allison, tell us what you've been up to.
Well, I basically kind of followed the pandemic trend and got myself pregnant and recently had a baby.
Mazel tov.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. But before that, I actually did go back to work in August, and we finished our sitcom end of November before December. So it's perfect timing because the baby was born in January. So.
And you've been working on a Netflix sitcom, LA-based. Is that right, Allison?
Yes, it was LA-based.
Listeners of the podcast might know what I've been up to, but I'll summarize briefly. I spent the second half of last year mostly down in Atlanta, first working on a Netflix film called Red Notice, working their COVID protocols and overseeing that. And then afterwards, I joined a Warner Brothers TV show called Legacies, again, in supporting them on their COVID protocols. And now I'm stepping back and returning to the podcast. Glad to have everybody here. Let's talk some about the larger trends of the industry. I'm going to put odds hypothesis, and you guys tell me if you agree or disagree, that film production is in fact very busy right now, despite the pandemic. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. It's crazy busy right now. Besides the show that I didn't return to or the New York one, I got no less than 10 different calls. Just, checking availability doesn't mean I would have booked it, but I don't think I've ever gotten that many calls. It's so busy right now. Anyone who's not working isn't working because they don't want to work, frankly.
I'm going to say that one thing that I'm finding through conversation, being that I just started again, was that there's a diminished amount of day playing on behalf of camera crew members, I would certainly say. I don't know about art departments. I mean, it seems that type of thing is really, really busy right now. But with testing and everything, productions are limiting the number of days that a staff can ask for additional crew, unless there's special circumstances in the script. And like on our show, extras we are limited to 30 extras. And if we have a bigger crowd scene, we're coming up with all sorts of optical grid systems to use those same 30 people in different clothing. And time sucking like crazy, but that's the thought at least. And so it is really busy though. I will say that too. There are tons of productions and more coming. And I think for certain people, who are in like leadership roles, there are probably a finite number of people for those positions, and they're probably really in big demand right now.
Well, a lot of what I do in my job, I don't really literally dress a whole lot of sets anymore because of my pre-existing condition and because of the pandemic. I actually just finished the last job I did working in a literal bubble. We set up a tent in our shop and put clear plastic walls around it, and that's where I did most of my work, which is, among other things, lining up set dressers for the week and scheduling their COVID, making sure they come in for their COVID tests, making sure they get paid their $250 stipend for coming in on a day off to take a COVID test, and making sure that production pays them that. And I will tell you that yes, the busyness, it's all reflected in the fact that we were having to bring in a lot of permit workers, a lot of people. It was their first time ever on a film set or dressing a location. We brought in a lot of people from Local One, which I was very happy to do because those folks have really had it bad. Live performance is still shut down. And so I was happy to give these people a lot of work. And I know that theater very often is a lifestyle which encourages discipline and professionalism, and we were very happy with our Local One workers. And a lot of the people I also dealt with were Teamsters, because another aspect of my job is to make sure that we load the right set elements onto the right truck that go to the right locations. And I can tell you too that the one I just finished up, at one point I had 4 trucks and a van on, and only one of those trucks had the traditional 1 driver and 1 helper. All the rest of the trucks were single drivers. And that's unusual, but it's just that the Teamsters could not spare any more drivers. They were stretched so thin. They were bringing on people who had never worked in that particular field of entertainment before. So yes, very busy, creating entertainment that people watch while they're still stuck at home, I guess.
Yeah, I would agree. I think LA's been really busy. My show that we started back in August. I started getting calls, I think July, August, September, and like through the fall. So the entire time I was finishing my chunk of my sitcom, I was getting calls like almost like every other week to work on shows. Can you work for 6 months? Can you work for a month? We need to finish our last episode, or, we're doing pickups or something. But it was actually for part-time and long-time work. And at the time I wasn't really public about, being pregnant. So people were still offering me like really long-term jobs. And since then, like obviously people joked like, oh, do you and your baby want to work on a pilot? But
he
like
can get your baby can get the union card in like no time at all.
But I've literally gotten those kind of texts like, you guys interested? Like the both of you? Like, we're starting this date, we end here, but obviously people know that I'm not working right now, but I still have already gotten like calls and texts saying like, when do you think you want to start working again? Because people that have already started their show in the fall and like are already kind of know their end date, are already picking up like their next shows. So they're kind of already trying to figure out their crews. So, and honestly, I don't really know when I'm going back because I kind of want to see how COVID plays out too. So I can't even give an honest answer because I don't even know. And this is our first kid. So I'm really curious to see when I also want to go back because, I know that that mothers and pregnant mothers can get the vaccine, but right now I'm not pregnant, so I can't get that vaccine, and I'm not old enough, and I don't have a pre-existing condition, and also mothers that are like caretakers of like special needs children can get vaccines, but I don't really fall under any of those, so I can't get the vaccine right now. So I'll just see how it plays out. My partner and I, we just don't know when will be the safe time. And my friends that have gone back to work and put their kids in daycare, and if say one person has the vaccine, the other person has to wear the mask the entire time they're back in their house because now the kid could be the carrier. So I don't really know how we want to live our life yet. So we're just really kind of seeing how we feel and how COVID and the herd immunity, if it works with the vaccines and who's getting it. Our families haven't even seen us yet since we've had the baby, and we're already approaching month 2. So it's pretty sad, and it's kind of like bleak, but also we're just being really precautious. And before the 2-month mark of a newborn, their immune system is really vulnerable. So we've just been waiting.
I want to talk more about vaccines. Let's put a pin in that as far as how vaccines will change things going forward. But before we do, I want to look back historically a little bit about how things have developed over the last 6-7 months. Quickly, when I started in July on Red Notice for Netflix, there was not a lot of production going on. Netflix said at the time, we're going to run 10 shows, small group, and see what works and doesn't work. And in fact, Red Notice was halfway done before they got shut down. And so it was very much, we've invested this much money up front. We're willing to spend extra money for the COVID protocols and such so that we can finish a movie that has, big actors and a big movie. We want to finish it. And so we're going to put that up front. And they also had some other productions that had reshoot days or things like that. That's how it started. We went in, we had all the money in the world. We built a huge team. We were doing a bubble. More on that when Red Notice actually comes out. I'll bring some of those folks in to talk about it. But even in the course of that, other productions started up, even Netflix production, much faster than they predicted. I think there was largely a fear of being left out, that if some people were producing things, the other studios and networks and streaming services were very much, we got to do our stuff as well. And there was suddenly a huge rush when honestly, there wasn't that much COVID expertise. Too fast, not too fast. I haven't heard a lot of disasters. What do you guys think, or what did you see about those trends, particularly in LA and New York? I was in Atlanta, of course.
Well, I see, first of all, that what you're saying is pretty much proven by daily press or at least weekly press announcements with a new streaming service pretty much every week, whether it's Paramount Plus. I can't remember if we were talking Disney Plus at the time of our last encounter, but they're just new avenues keep opening up. It's a seemingly limitless fountain of money, and it is a tremendous amount of financial risk behind it. You do have to have a lot of money in order to start these streaming services and to provide the production to fill up all of those hours. So, is it too fast? I was very involved and very aware of the development of the return to work agreement. And I think you and I spoke about that. I was hosting weekly Zoom meetings with fellow prop and set decorating friends leading up to the passing of that. And among those people were our union representative for Union Shop Steward. So we could see what was asked for, and we could then see what we eventually got from the return to work agreement. And on paper, what the return to work agreement asked for, I think really did make it I still think it's safer to go on a film set than it is a grocery store.
Totally.
At least we know that our coworkers are being tested. We know that the results are being rushed pretty quickly, usually a day or within a 24-hour to at the longest 48-hour period. So I think it's relatively safe, but at the same time, it's not perfect. I had a show shut down for 2 weeks. because we had Zone A people. One of our Zone A people got tested for positive. So that took away the actors, the director, the DP, the sound people. We were out for 2 weeks. So it's not perfect. I think it's better. And I think we will discuss probably in a little bit the adherence by both production personnel and crew as to how closely we've really paid attention to those guidelines. Right now, industry-wide, I'd give us a B-.
Well, that's interesting, Dan, on the rating, because I do actually agree with you. When we last talked about this, I think I expressed some skepticism that it was even possible for us to do the work that we needed to do under these sort of restrictions. However, when I started working in the COVID space and being responsible for some of these protocols, I was convinced that if people follow the rules, wear your mask, maintain distance, wash your hands, neither of my sets did we have any documented on-set passing. We did shut down sometimes, mostly because, as you said, someone tested positive. And if you have an actor test positive, all the other actors that have been without their mask, they got to go into quarantine for a period of time to see if they develop. But even in those cases, we didn't have a lot of people developing separately. And it really was that kind of shutdown. We didn't get a lot of passing on set. But again, we were really strict about the rules. And I think that kept it safe for us. Again, though, you can't control the larger society, right? That's the where it spreads and what people are doing on their off time with different approaches.
That's the kicker. And as Allison pointed out, children, well, especially Allison's baby, developing an immunity as we speak. But still, the jury, I think the scientific jury is still out in terms of how children can spread, how easily or not easily children can attain the virus and spread it to other people. But yeah, people go home to their kids were at daycare, their kids were at kindergarten, their kids were with other friends, their spouses, their partners, their lovers, whatever, are all, everybody goes out at some point. We don't just go home to our bubbles. So it's going to be flawed no matter what. There's no way, unless you do that thing that I think Tyler Perry did early on, where it's like everybody works in an encampment for 3 weeks. But that does not make for happy crew people, and I don't think you could do that in industry wide. But I just want to say one other thing too, and I don't mean to monopolize this conversation, which is that in addition to the show I did where we had to take 2 weeks off because the A people got tested positive, in my department 2 weeks prior to that, we had 10 people in my department get quarantined. One person got tested positive, and it was determined that 9 other set dressers had to quarantine as well. And, we're in the middle of production, and one of my Teamsters tested positive the very next day. So in that amount of space, I had to call Local 52, get 10 new set dressers, get them tested, get them back on the work site. And then we had to get new Teamsters as well. But the production doesn't shut down for those of us below the line, as the show is not usually, unless it's a real mass infection. But when the people next to the camera, and certainly in front of the camera, go down, we all go down. That's the way it is.
Yeah, the most we had is we shut down, only for a few days here and a few days there, mostly because we had a couple of Zone B test positive, and because like in construction and because of their pods and the way they were working, we would lose those people to go quarantine. So our department in construction fell way behind. And I'm on a first season show. So these aren't standing sets. They're starting from scratch with these sets that are very, very complicated. So when we had one Zone A person test positive, and it happened to be on a Monday, and they hadn't worked the previous week, so we didn't have to shut down due to them, but we ended up shutting down just because, all right, well, they're out. The only actors available can film on the sets that aren't ready because Zone B hasn't finished building them yet. And it becomes this weird domino effect for scheduling that is very, very difficult in that, okay, well, we can't film with that actor, but we can't film on this set, but we can't film here. Okay, so these are the 3 scenes we can film. Oh, that actor's in LA and they need to fly in and quarantine for, at the time, 10 days. Okay, this is what we can do. Well, let's film this one scene. One scene is not worth a day. Let's shut down. Let's call it a day of prep. Let's do this. So the ball's in the air, the constant shuffling, the constant reevaluating as every day something changes is one of the things that we've really had to deal with on my show. as to like coming back too fast or something, like you're never going to know if you came back too fast until you do it. That's one of the things. It's like our business, I think I said it on the previous podcast, we adapt. That's what we do. So if we came back too fast, we learned how to like, okay, hang on, slow this down, figure this part out, move this around. But also every single show is different. You're going to have shows that are a little bit more lackadaisical. You're going to have shows that are much more stringent. So Dan, I think your assessment is right about B-. Some shows are A, some shows are failing, and it averages to a B, B-. And I think that's about right.
I think the difference is between the A productions and the B- or the F productions even. It's both a combination of the ability to come up with a system and keep it properly organized. And it's also just a matter of how much of, can I say a curse word on this show? How much of a shit you give. You can beat me out if you want. You know, on all the things I've worked so far, you know, there has been, you get the protocol, you get the memos, you get the things you have to sign to say that you read the memos, you take the online courses, and that's all great. And that's wonderful. And we all have COVID teams, but there was one show I did where I thought the COVID team was spot on. The temperatures were checked first thing every morning. For the onset crew, they were done, you know, before you could enter the set. I can't say for this last one I did what the onset thing was about, but I know that for us offset people, there were days we didn't get temperature checked, or if it did, they would come in at like noon. And I'd be like, guys, if you're going to take our temperature, if we're going to find out we're sick, the time to do it is like 7 o'clock. We get here at 7. Maybe you should too. And they'd be like, yeah, that's probably a good idea. And it never happened, you know? So it's like, are you just checking off a list because that's your job? Or do you really give a shit? And do you really want to be part of this worldwide team of people that want to get rid of COVID, not only within our industry, but within our society?
Let's take a moment to do a quick aside because we referenced zones and all of our listeners might not be familiar with how things are set up. I know that a lot of the studios were in fact ahead of the industry standards on designing zones, and different studios and different productions use, and you guys tell me if it's still true, some different standards, whether it's colors or letters or numbers. But basically when we're talking about zone A, it's anyone that has to be in a space where actors will be without masks who are at the most risk. So anyone else that's in that space. And the idea of the protocols is to minimize the number of people that have to be ever within not just 6 feet, but even 10 feet of the actors, like to create that kind of zone. Were you guys seeing similar implementations of that guideline, or were there even stricter things you were following?
I'd say it was similar, yet in order to facilitate smooth movement, pretty much my entire camera, grip, and electric crew are zone A. And within that, it is contingent upon us and in collaboration with the AD and the COVID officers to make sure that we're populating the set in a proper controlled manner, when the actors are around, especially. When they're not around, there's only so much room in a tight space, of course, but we're crowding it up. You know, it's certainly getting those 10, you know, those 3 electricians and a couple of grips to rig a light are in there. I'm finding it's in this world of cableless lights, it's simplifying things, and that has a tremendously positive COVID implication in regard to how many people need to be in a room to set a light at a point. The solution on my company's part is not to limit the number of people with access, but to test a larger number and ensure the safety that way by having a number of people who have access when necessary.
I mean, I think there's a challenge with testing though, right? Like it really, you get a snapshot of whether they had the virus a day or two. And I know the testing has gotten more sensitive, but it's really, when I've been on productions where they wanted to use testing as a gateway, I thought that was a mistake. Like actually, because
agreed,
it's a false sense of security that can create.
It's mostly about I don't know, constancy of motion. I'm going to call it. You know, the notion that you're acknowledging the flow of the virus and you're doing the best you can to keep tabs on it. Certainly, we're all going home to our families on the weekend. Our sons are grown, and working, and they have their own, you know, protocols and safety to consider. But, we're out and about in the world in a different way than we were a year ago, for sure. But I'm home this weekend. I'm not going anywhere, and that's part of that is my inclination when I'm resting, getting ready for a big day. But it's also, I'm going to be responsible to the community I've stepped into.
Also, randomly, I never go anywhere on the weekend just because I get so tired of wearing a mask all day long.
Okay.
And on the weekend, I'm so happy to wear a mask. I'm like, oh, I could go for a walk. I got to put a mask on. I'll just stay inside and look outside. Like, there's the mask constant is just exhausting.
I think that the adherence to mask wearing, I was really worried, I think the last time we were speaking about, how's it going to be, the political environment at that time in July, pre-election, who was going to comply, who was going to try to sneak around it. And, I think when we first came back, I do know of a couple of cases where people got sent home. And I know 2 cases where people were dismissed outright for not wearing masks and refusing to, and putting up a big baby tantrum about it. But I see most of the time now, at least around me, and you guys, you and Katie, you and David are more on set than I've been in a long time. Mm-hmm. I don't see a lot of resistance anymore, even to the supposed tough guys that were going to try to fight it. They've given up. They want their paychecks.
Yeah. I was going to say, for the most part, everyone wears the mask and doesn't have issues. The only thing I've had to learn as we left the stage and went out in the New York winter locations, I've had to find mini bubbles for the first ACs to pull focus, because as they wear glasses with the mask, it fogs up. They can't see, they can't pull focus. I'm like, so they have to pull their mask down just to literally see the monitor. So I'm like, okay, then you stand over here, not next to anyone. We'll get plexi around you for this scenario, just so they can see. Or I've had to explain to the COVID monitor, who's not someone who's used to being on set, who's a nurse and a COVID monitor, why the Steadicam operator can't wear the shield, that he just has to wear the mask. He has to wear the shield. I'm like, it's a safety issue if he's wearing the shield and there's a reflection and he can't see where he's walking. He's got glasses on. Naturally, he just wears glasses. This is a bigger safety issue than COVID. I hate saying that, but if he trips and falls and breaks a leg, I could see that's an issue. So I have to kind of explain why there are exceptions to the overall rules. And there are exceptions, but we figure out how to make them work.
Well, at least for that, it sounds like it's obviously was a safety consideration. Yes. It wasn't just about, well, we need to get this shot before lunch.
No. Exactly.
And I guess that's another thing I'm curious what you and Dave have to say is, my concern had always been too, once we go back, are we going to be able to take our time and do this right? Or are we going to expect the same results, only with a lot more precautions and a lot more limits?
I think everyone acknowledges where I am that some of this stuff takes time. There are layers. The ability to communicate crisply and quietly with your coworkers is limited severely sometimes. That's the hardest part to me, is the need to lean into my gaffer, to the assistant director, to just have a quick moment to talk about the strategy for the next 10 minutes or where that light needs to go, or let's not pay attention to that freaking guy, just even if it's just that moment, and let's do what we know we need to, that's all compromised. I will say that I am finding that basically everyone is in the same boat. There have been some resistances to PPE on set, certainly shields. But one crew member reminded another crew member about someone who passed away. Mm. And that changed the whole thing. And you can definitely tell there are definitely, I have some old school thinkers on my job who are also some of the younger members of my crew. And they have their doubts about all this. And you can tell by the way in which they deal with their PPE. But I do feel very strongly that everyone is very concerned with looking out for each other and understand that we're in this circumstance. And the only other thing I'll say, I guess, is I am constantly blown away by the amount of plastic that is being used. It's killing me. It's horrible.
Yeah, completely agree. The lunch double bag, like one bag, half a lunch is in a plastic bag and then they put it in a brown paper bag. Oh, you can recycle those bags. Like, or you could just not use 2 bags. Like, it's just the amount of PPE we go through, the amount of the shields, if you didn't order your own shield that can flip up and flip down and they just hand you a plastic shield. And if you leave it on the set that night and you forget to take it with you, like I'm trying to be good and use mine for 2-3 weeks until it's so scratched up I can't see through it and then replace it. But there's stacks of them. I'm like, oh my God, I'm trying to be green also, but trying to save lives. So yeah, between saving lives and saving the earth, I'm going to choose a life right now, but still like,
and
oh
it's
my
all
God.
saving lives.
Exactly. It's like, oh, holy cow. It's amazing.
Allison, one of the things you brought up last time was specifically in terms of your sitcom that you had kids, that it wasn't clear how much larger they were going to be 6 months later. When you went back to work, how did you guys manage that with your completion of that series for Netflix?
It was one of those like unspoken things. It's like when you switch a character, you cast differently. It's like, oh, she's just older now. I don't know. We just kind of dealt with it. Luckily, 2 of the kids were roughly the same size. However, one of the boys' voices, like he went through puberty, so he was all of a sudden like a man when he came back. Like I was like in the fitting room, I was like, "Who's in there?" I was like, "Do we have a new boy?" Like, no, he just went through puberty. Yeah, exactly. But one of the little girls, she definitely had a growth spurt, so we just kind of dealt with that. But yeah, and in terms of the zones, that was kind of like a muddled thing because in terms of costume and hair and makeup, it's very intimate because we touch the actors constantly. So a lot of us are zone A or, the greens or whatever, the highest zone. So you're getting tested a lot. I would get flipped a lot because I'm not on set, but I constantly go to set with my designer to approve looks, to run things back, to change people quickly. In fittings, you're with them a lot. So I would get constantly flipped. And then on our call sheet, it would show like the color zone you're in. And so when you walk in that day, what if you're getting the PCR or the rapid. The PCR is more thorough, and then it can check if you had it before or now or et cetera. The rapid's not as accurate, so we would alternate depending on which one you would get and depending on your zone. So my zone constantly got flipped. It was just because I think budget wise in terms of the production, and also like, are you really going to be with the cast that day or are you just going to be out shopping? It depends on, how much we touch them or we're exposed to them. At the same time, like when you would go to set, I thought that was interesting because once the actors took their masks off, you're kind of all in the same bubble. So like our grips only got tested, I think once a week, and then, but they're still just like walking by with a light. So like they're still in proximity to those actors. So I don't know, but at the same time I was pregnant and I didn't feel unsafe because we were covered. We had gowns, we had shields, we had masks. We weren't allowed to wear our own. It was always what was provided to us. So it was like the proper PPE. And unfortunately, we also would throw away a lot of plastic and at the same time, they didn't want to reuse it. If it was touched, if it was exposed. And then with costuming, we also couldn't go into their wardrobe trailer like we used to. We'd have to hand it off or they would have to drop their things off and we would have to launder all the time. So that's why we were in a higher zone because we're touching everything. And also we couldn't pamper our actors as much as they would have liked. It was no more comfort shoes, no more comfort jackets. It was kind of just like deal with it. And we did take away a lot of our background. It just, we no longer had a live audience that would come in, had to be canned laughter, and our actors and are comedians essentially, and they're used to traveling and doing stand-up. So they want an audience. So it did break my heart a little bit that COVID changed that, but I didn't feel like we went back too soon because like Katie was saying, like, you kind of just don't know unless you do it. And I think for a sitcom, we weren't on different locations. We weren't traveling with the crew. It was the best contained scenario ever. They just cut back how many people were on set. So it wasn't that bad.
And in my shop setup, again, because of my pre-existing condition, being a heart transplant patient, I'm extremely sensitive to being there in general. I'm very afraid. That's why I have my bubble. But I'm not just thinking of myself. It just makes me more, I think I'm more aware than most of the people that I work with. And so what I saw a lot of, and this was an issue broached by David, and I think by all of us really, is how do you maintain social distancing in this workspace? How do you not be too close? Or how, I think that the agreement was, well, if you're within 6 feet, it's okay as long as you aren't there for a prolonged period of time, 10 to 15 minutes. But that's not scientific. That's just wishful, hopeful thinking. But it's also it's accommodating the fact that I think it would be impossible for us to have a production where we 100% of the time kept 6 feet from one another, whether we're loading a truck or operating a camera, what have you. But even in my simple shop setup, where we're not under the urgency of an AD asking how much time, et cetera, there's still a hesitancy. It's just human nature to social distancing. I was constantly saying to my people, especially just in idle moments, 6 feet, more than 6 feet, please, 6 feet. Oh, or when I would come out of the bubble to address a Teamster or another set dresser to say, these are the things we need to do today, they would naturally start walking toward me, especially as they spoke. It's just a social custom. We like to get close. And I literally did what I called the COVID tango. As they're walking toward me, I start walking backward. And if they don't get the hint, I put my hand up like Diana Ross and the Supremes. And that's what it has to, people are just still used to, it's been over a year, but people are still used to the customs with which they grew up. That you get in tight to people, especially if you like them, if you want to be close to them. It's just a natural thing. And again, we got to do these jobs, and sometimes we do have to fudge on those hard rules. But my particular case makes me kind of the guy that's constantly griping at people, just because I'm aware of that.
Actually, David, I think you'll appreciate this. On my show, the DP would always say, "Hey, Katie," and I would turn and kind of take a step towards her. It's like, no distance. I'm like, okay, I'm trying to keep my distance. However, somehow you always manage to say something on my left ear, which is the ear with my walkie-talkie in it. And I can't, I'm actually just kind of turning so I can put my right ear closer to you so I can hear what you, so yeah. Just if you approach me from your right, I'm just going to look at you, or turn my head so I can hear you. If you approach me from left, I'm trying to look at you so I can read your lips, which I can't read because you have a mask on. It's like, yeah, but Dan, you're right. It's mind blowing. You always turn towards, and especially if someone's 6 foot plus away from you, that's not a normal speaking space. Right. Even if you don't want to get close talk or close, but you want to get closer than 6 feet if someone's actually talking to you, because between masks and shields and air purifiers that are on, it's hard to even hear. So you feel like you're yelling. That's one thing. It's COVID doesn't get enough credit for how hard it is to work on set with all of the noise that is now being created, and you have to talk over it all.
I have a new director to television, my first episode on the show. I have a bunch of them, which is one of the reasons I'm there, and I'm happy to help. But I often need to turn to the assistant director or the camera operator or the gaffer and say something that's really just for them, and that I really have no intention of anyone else hearing. It's not about it being snide or anything, although sometimes it might be. It doesn't help for more people to hear it. The game of telephone is a dangerous game, especially when you can't hear.
Exactly.
So it is very frustrating because there are often things I want to say that are not meant for 6 feet away.
Mm-hmm. And you can't even lip sync them.
No, I mean, there are the universal finger signals on the set on the film set that allow us to make succinct points occasionally.
Exactly.
Is there a finger signal yet for pull your mask over your nose? Because I should learn that one. That's one I get.
We could make it up. Unfortunately, this is an audio show. Otherwise, we could each develop our own and show them to America.
I've actually had to tell our caterers twice. Can you put your mask up over your nose as you prepare my food, please?
Chin shields. Yeah, chin shields.
Yeah.
One of the things Katie predicted last time was that everything was just going to take longer. You're going to need more time. Dan, you wondered if producers were going to have the patience to wait for stuff to take longer and just the extra delays. How has that played out with shows going back? Are they taking a long time? Are people patient? You guys talk about your experiences there.
Well, for my show, it was interesting. They were set up. They were about a month away from filming when they got shut down. And they had a certain number of days per episode planned, scheduled, which was already sort of wishful thinking, but start with something. And so when I joined, and in the shutdown, they had taken the total of number of days per episode and said, okay, well, that's theoretically based on 12-hour days. If we're going to do 10-hour days, take 2 hours from each day and add another day. Right. Which actually on stage, we've actually been good about. On stage, we stuck with 10-hour days for the most part. We had a couple that went over, but they were like set specific or actor specific. But they just did the math and said, okay, for every 5 days of shooting, taking 2 hours, add another day. So you have this many days. But that doesn't account for COVID. Yeah, it does. See, it's the hours. I'm like, no, that's based on the concept that you are going to move at the same speed. We are not going to move at the same speed. I cannot do all of the things, all the little 5-minute time savers that I do 10 times a day that might save you 50 minutes, and that 17 other people are also doing that save you 15 minutes here and there and end up saving you an hour and a half each day. We can't do those anymore. So that hour and a half needs to be built back in. Everything is going to take longer. And honestly, the answer I got back was, but we took those 2 hours. I'm like, okay, I don't think you're understanding the logic of what I'm trying to explain here. But, or the other answer was, the studio still hasn't actually approved those extra days. I'm like, the studio didn't approve COVID. It's still here. I don't know what else to tell you about that.
It makes me, one of my favorite sayings, every minute takes time.
It's so true.
And they don't get it sometimes. And, this isn't being driven by creating a vehicle that's safe and efficient. It's about creating a vehicle that's safe from litigation. I think, honestly, that's a lot of it. Yeah. And I understand that it's a business before it's anything else. And that's a responsibility of a business to protect itself. And I do feel safe on set, generally. I really do. We have to remember the reasons these things are happening are not necessarily out of care for the human condition.
Exactly. Well, I think that's it. You could probably make one of those pie charts, and each production sort of has a different look to it in terms of care for the human condition versus getting X number of footage in the can in a day versus fear of liability. I think every single production since that we've come back, has their little packet they send out to the employees that says, we at such and such productions, care, very, very much about this and want, worker safety is number one. It's easy to say, but then you have to implement it. Part of that is you have to have it, you have to give a shit. You have to really put in the time and the money and the thought. And some folks are able to do that. Some are not able to do it, and some don't even want to do it. I don't know the state of commercials. They've had a very shoddy record, at least in a year ago or so. I don't know if they've improved any, but it's still a lot of times, from my understanding, like, well, we've got this kid who's taken an 8-hour course, and now he's your COVID manager. And it's like, well, does he know? Has he ever worked a job before? At all? So I still have a lot of doubts. Still have a lot of questions.
There are a couple of big studios involved in my project, and they kind of they attend to different domains within it. But I will say that the safety officers and health and safety officers I've seen are knowledgeable. They're film savvy, and they're pleasant to deal with. So on this particular job I'm on, I'm amazed by the machinations of it all. And there are things I don't understand or might think would be done differently, but I feel as if I'm seeing a good amount of care and personal involvement, and that does indeed make a big difference.
Well, and I think, as Katie alluded to earlier, just the sheer logistical approach to dealing with this from a production point of view. X person can only come in for these days. X location is only available for these certain days. And then your days are changed because of a test result, or, we have to test again because of this or that. I mean, this is where people, this is where ADs, production managers, producers, All these people are really earning their stripes. I've seen over my career the proliferation of so-called producers, where it starts out with 4, and by the time you're in season 10, you've got 16, 18 so-called producers all sitting in chairs off to the side. But the truth is, there are people that really know how to do it, that really know how to be producers, production managers. They really know how to take care of people and time and things. And some people are really, really good at it. Some people are not. And then I think there are a few that are just going to be jerks about it no matter what, or expecting the same results with no changes in behavior, and that's impossible.
One way that our production kind of cut down on time was from the top was our writers tried to make it like the same day for each episode. So that took away costume changes, hair and makeup changes, and then also they would write in fewer background.
Interesting. That actually does save a lot of time and interaction with people.
I haven't been a prop master in it probably, I guess, 3 years or so. So I can't really speak for any prop master. I'm curious, maybe you as on-set observers have noticed, one of my big problems when I was doing it was having to deal with, not really with producers so much as actors and directors and other so-called creatives who on the spur of the moment would come up to me and say, I've got a really great idea. Or, what would be great?
Words.
Yeah, which means I've got to get in a car and start driving all over to get something before you start rolling.
I mean, that still happened.
What's that?
I mean, that still happened.
Still happens. That's
sure.
what I'm wondering. I'm wondering if that still happens, or have people been more understanding? The creatives been more understanding about the logistical problems of that.
I think it's just like what we were saying about production managers, producers. Right? There are people who get it and people who don't. And I think those of us who have been doing this for a long time and have seen a lot of different situations come our way, there's a degree of planning that's always important, but there needs to be an ability to react spontaneously to things and figure it out and come up with solutions that are possible and achievable within certain time and whatever parameters. And there are many who get it, like we said, and they're the ones who make it possible to get through this extra stuff. And then there are people who are either new or have a certain method of seeing the world or seeing a project that makes it much more difficult. And that's all, and COVID just magnifies that in my head. It's just another problem, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it is so busy that right now the opportunity for an assistant or somebody to now become, the head person in a chair or what have you, there's opportunity abounding for so many people. So, there are going to be people who are naturally good at that and get it, regardless of their experience, and others that are going to just have to learn the hard way. Like, listen, we were all young once too, and I've certainly learned a lot through my mistakes.
Asking about props, I don't want to go too deep on that because it's an opportunity to plug a future episode. I'm going to have some prop guys on in a couple of weeks to talk specifically about the challenges around COVID and props on an ongoing basis. But it does, to your point, Dan, it does bring up that larger issue of how things get done and what sort of planning can go into it. At the same time, maintaining the flexibility that lets us be creative. I saw a big shift between what I did on Netflix and then what was happening on the TV show. And there's a lot of factors there. One, it was so early with Netflix. It's large. We have a lot more control over what we want to get done to complete the movie. But there was a lot of control on that. We were able to build a system. On TV, I felt that there was still a lot of pressure to adapt quickly for all circumstances in ways that actually made the COVID challenge larger, even though the scope of what we were shooting was smaller in the sense of, well, it's rainy, even something like rain, well, we have to change sets. How do we do that quickly? We need extra electricians or we need extra folks. How do we onboard them quickly, given the testing and the, what the turnaround is to be safe, but also a shifting of time and so much happening that just getting folks to work when there's so much production happening was its own challenge. And that certainly brought some risk back in, and I'd found, I wonder if you guys are seeing similar with your shows, or has it changed fundamentally about the work we're getting done?
I would say the single happiest development, as far as I'm concerned, that COVID has mandated is the show I'm on is not shooting tandem days. And I think that's a great thing personally. I am personally, I don't like tandem days. I find them to, they are assigned by the people who are paying for things that they don't care whether it's as good or not.
Define tandem days for our listeners who might not know.
Sure. Basically, when you're shooting a show, they give you, on a show that does tandems, they give you 8 days of principal shooting where you have your entire crew together. And then they give you an extra day, a day 9, which is called a tandem day, where your episode finishes a day 9 and the other episode, the next episode, starts their day 1 on the same day. So you tend to split your crew. You have a show that goes out on location, a show that stays on the stages. And so you can split the work, and you assign different actors are assigned, to different, and sometimes you have to send an actor from one tandem to another, which is a whole thing in terms of timing, trickiness. But you're basically diluting your main crew. You're taking the people who know the show best, and you're sending one camera operator here, one camera operator there. Your key grip can only be in one place. Your gaffer can only be in one place. Your very able best boys end up keying on the other unit, which is great because it helps them grow. That's probably the one good thing about tandem. But for crew, it's actually a way the studio lessens the number of days of production. So your regular crew, if you're on your regular episodic season of 22 episodes, that's 3 weeks less work for your regular crew because someone else is doing those days.
Yeah,
So,
David and I worked on Law and Order for a lot of years together, and they would always try to sort of sell it to us like, look at it this way, you guys get to go to summer vacation a day or two early. Isn't that great? We're like, no, I want to get paid for as many days as I can before I go on vacation. So no, I don't think so. And Dave's right. It's hard to maintain, and this is off of COVID, I guess, to an extent, but it's hard to maintain quality and focus and making sure the right, props or the right costumes go back and forth from one location to another. It's a pain in the neck, and it saves somebody time and money, but it's not for the benefit of the production.
Let's turn our attention to the future. What of these process changes that we've made do you guys think are going to stick even as the pandemic gets under control?
I mean, I would have liked to have thought that 10-hour days would stick, but we're already going to longer days on location. And I'm hearing about shows that are doing 12 to 14 hours on a somewhat regular basis. So
we're scheduled for 12s.
Yeah, I think the concept of 10-hour days, if COVID didn't make us stick to that, nothing is gonna, unless like flat out all unions striking for that. And even then, that's never gonna happen, because there are a lot of people who, like, I'm a fan of the 10-hour day, but I don't get paid hourly. There are people who like 12-hour days because they want that extra 2 hours of overtime. Not everybody, but just enough that it makes it really hard to make it a industry-wide true standard. So I don't think that will stick, just because, like Dave was saying with the tandems, it's like, if it's something that will finish the overall production in fewer days, they're going to push for it. I can't think of what might, because everything else that's COVID related costs money.
Yeah.
And do you think there'll be pressure to eventually reduce these other aspects of it? What about these COVID teams? When do you think we'll have productions that don't have either monitors on set or testing going on? Like, I think that's still going to be a while, but there's probably a line on the horizon where those jobs go away, because every production, whether they're serious about it or not, has someone who is responsible for COVID that's not an assistant director, for example.
Well, my completely uneducated guess is through 2021, I think we should expect the COVID team to still be a part of production. And, it's all about, when does herd immunity really start to kick in and make itself known scientifically? When do the numbers support it? I don't think productions want to make themselves liable. And nobody wants to be the one to be the one that sort of started up a mini flare up all over again in the industry. So I think COVID teams are here for the rest of the year.
Yeah,
I think COVID teams are here as long as we all still have to wear masks. There might be a point where we don't have to wear shields, or we don't have to have the very loud air scrubbers on set. But I think we have to wear masks for the near future, not just the end of 2021, but beyond that. And as long as that's happening, then testing, maybe not as frequently, but testing will still happen, and COVID teams.
Yeah,
monitor that.
We have to be really careful. It's clear that this is a virus that doesn't mind mutating. And as long as there's enough humans harboring it and allowing it to potentially change and come up with new variants that could be more contagious, or our immune systems aren't, it's like the flu. We might have to have a yearly COVID shot. And if we get to a place where we understand the virus well enough that we can do that and bring people back safely. I mean, the flu is basically, it's a dangerous virus for older people and stuff, but it's fairly much under what's acceptable control as a population in all of our heads. And if we can get COVID to that, but we're not close yet. You know, we're still figuring this thing out, the long-term repercussions of it, whether immunity really means something more than short-term, a lot of different things to figure out.
Well, I think in terms of personal crew behavior, I think one thing that could change is, you know, I know in my career, which is like 35, I've been doing this for about 35 years now. But, you know, for much of it, whenever I felt fluish or I've had a cold or whatever, I've still dragged my ass into work.
Yeah.
You know, because I felt that either the responsibility toward the show itself, that show must go on, circus worker feeling, or also, you know, look, I got bills to pay. And if I don't come into work, I don't get paid. We don't get sick pay in our industry, you know, so if you don't come in, somebody else takes your spot for the day. So I'm wondering now, I think there will be a change in the onset culture that somebody dragging their butts in to work, even though they're coughing and hacking, you're not going to be looked at as like a tough guy or a team player anymore. You're going to be looked at as a hazard, and rightly so. You know, it's insane, some of the stuff I did, you know, for whatever reason I chose to. Got to go in today.
You know what? That's a fair point. I think you're right. And I think sick pay might come back, not to the extent that it is now, where, you know, if you test positive, or even if you have to quarantine and you get 2 weeks paid or what have, even if you have symptoms, you get sick pay automatically, just to make sure you stay home.
Right.
I'd be curious if that comes into play at a more limited basis, like number of sick days per show that you're on or something like that, but just to encourage people to not spread the basic flu, because that can take, I mean, back pre-COVID, like come September, kids went back to school, that flu went around the set just as fast. The moment a kid brought it home to a parent, that parent went to set, that set was a sicky, like petri dish for a month. I'd be curious, actually, that's interesting. Sick days might actually stick around.
Yeah, and as somebody, you know, I do have to put in on time cards for people to go on quarantine, you know, for their sick pay for their 10 days. And it's true. I hadn't thought of that. When will somebody say, well, that's enough of that? You know, that's costing us. We're paying people, you know, to do nothing. We don't want to do that anymore. You know, I don't know when the return to work agreement will be, you know, null and void. Actually, I think it actually says on the thing of when that will be renegotiated. I'm not sure what the date is.
I think we're coming up. I think it's March 31st of this year.
Is it a 6-month agreement versus
I don't remember. It's
year?
coming up this spring to renegotiate and to reevaluate where we are at some point.
Yeah.
I think it was less than a year that the original contract.
Yeah. When I was shop steward on Law and Order with Dave, one of the things I tried to get just for our contract, if nobody else's, was 2 sick days a year, because we were doing 22 episodes a season. And that was 9 months out of a calendar year. People are going to get sick and they need to stay home. And I couldn't get that going with either my local or the production company without giving up major stuff for it.
In terms of like personal future, I feel like already I'm more selective about what I take. And I immediately want to know what production it is, because I'm not going to name any names of like, you know, which production I feel like is more safe or unsafe, but just in terms of just hearsay of like certain shows that I know have tested positive over and over again versus other shows, like our show never tested positive. And although our crew was very conscious of it, because, you know, one person had cancer before, other people just, you know, they were very aware and they had kids and they didn't want to bring it home. But I definitely am more selective now. And also I've never been so ready to walk off a set. Not like my set, but I was like, if I don't feel safe, bye. Like, there's my bag, you know, bye. Find someone else, you know. And I've also never spoken up so much, just in terms of just like, you're not making me feel safe, step away. Or, you know, I mean, especially when I was pregnant, I was like, I have a baby, back off. I mean, I just was not shy about it. And I've never been that vocal about my safety, because you don't really think about it that much because, oh, we're tired, etc. But now it's like more than ever. I've been more vocal. I'm more selective. And I really do feel like this is going to go through 2022. Not maybe through 2022, but definitely like PPE, COVID protocol, COVID teams, etc. I don't think you're going to have a cast member, especially a high profile, that's going to walk on a set like, oh, you don't have a COVID team? That's okay.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. They're not wearing masks.
Totally right.
So
It's all about protecting number one on the call sheet at the end of the day.
Exactly.
Certainly when you have like states like Texas and Mississippi deciding that they're going to just strip all restrictions and pretend nothing's going on, as long as there are attitudes like that, it's going to be very hard for this virus to really go away.
Actually, that's interesting, especially Mississippi being so close to Georgia and Atlanta. How much is that going to start affecting Atlanta, which then starts to affect production staying more in LA or New York? Like the domino effects of every little thing. It's, again, one of those things we're not going to be able to know until 5 years when we look back, but like how it's butterfly effects that I think will be fascinating to look back on.
And look at it's not like they're going to just stop making shows if there's another outbreak.
No.
America wants its entertainment. It's one of our biggest industrial exports, entertainment. And it's not, we're not essential workers like the term is, but on the other hand, people sort of treat what we do as an essential product, like hamburgers and Coca-Cola. America want their movies and TV show. They get bored. They want emotional stimulus, and we give it to them.
Hey, Dan, did you know that the state of New Jersey, actually, if you go online to look for a COVID vaccine and you are not a resident of New Jersey, but work in the entertainment business, you are eligible for the vaccine.
Wow, did not know that.
Ooh, I need to look that up right now.
I have an assistant director friend who last week during prep drove down to Camden, New Jersey for his first 8 a.m. shot. I'm waiting till it's closer because I need my sleep more than that.
I just got mine on Friday. My number one shot of Moderna in Westchester. Well, thank you.
Great.
New Jersey is actually saying that in terms of their desire to grow the industry in their state, we are essential workers. Right. In essence,
it's actually funny. I got into a little bit of a Twitter debate way back in, I don't know, October or something with somebody who said, we're not essential. I'm like, look, I'm not by any means making the argument we're essential compared to nurses, doctors, frontline workers, hell, even grocery store workers. That being said, I think our industry is actually, by going back to work, helping to stop the spread, because there are literally tens of thousands of people who are now being tested on a regular basis, constantly wearing PPE, who wouldn't normally. The contact tracing is at a much higher quality. Like the show I'm on, anyone who's tested positive, anyone in their pod didn't get it. Like they quarantined, but they never tested positive. We find out so freaking fast, and we do contact tracing immediately, so much faster than your average state or city local government can do it.
Totally.
That it's literally taking the money that the industry pays and putting it towards stopping the spread. Because if we weren't at work, if the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people across the United States in our business were not at work, we'd be staying home, yes, theoretically, but maybe you're out doing something else. Maybe you're not wearing a PPE while you're out. Maybe you're not getting tested and you don't even realize for 5-6 days that you're actually positive and you spread it everywhere. It's like, we're arguably helping to stop the spread, depending on how strict your protocols are.
Listen, I wish the teaching profession, I wish education had the resources that we do.
Yes.
Because really so we're in such a lucrative business that overall we can afford to pay for all the PPE and all the tests and the extra staff. I wish the same could be said for teachers, which obviously that's more vital to our nation than what we do. Although on the other hand too, while people are quarantining themselves and staying inside on perfectly good days like today, they want to watch something. So we give them something to watch.
Exactly.
We give them an 8-part series to binge on.
We give them another reason to stay home and not go outside.
It kind of does make a statement that they do have some money to burn.
Yep.
And then if I ask for a scissor lift, to help them save time and money, actually. But they're like, no, we can't afford that. It makes me look at all the stacks of plastic for lunch that cost less than my scissor lift.
Yeah.
They're different. I get it. But there's an irony to it that doesn't escape me.
Well, I think we've established that, yes, there is money in the industry. to put these protocols into effect, but it is creating an environment where you are safer on set than you are in society in general. And you're spending your entire day under these conditions and with these controls. I'm reminded, as an aside, there was something that went viral where a woman was complaining about in California about her restaurant was shut down, but there was this eating area set up nearby, and she made a video. And again, all sympathy for her and her restaurant, but it was a lot of apples to oranges in the sense that the way crews are eating was single person at a table, handed a meal, your mask is off for 10 minutes, you eat your food, you put your mask on and return, versus what you're doing in a restaurant. I mean, that was one of our biggest things on the sets is there's really no socializing at lunch anymore on a film set. And if you're going to conduct a restaurant like that, you're going to stay safe. But obviously we're working in a different condition. Again, not to wade into California politics, but it just goes again to the fact that we were working safely on set. On the uses of vaccines, I don't think it's going to change it all that much because those protocols need to stay in place as we're still learning the science about the vaccines and such. And if people, and whether you get the vaccine or don't get the vaccine or who gets it or how quickly it rolls out, to Allison's point, I think through the year and into 2022, we're going to keep using some version of these protocols because the virus is still going to be out there and we don't know, and we don't want to be responsible for folks getting it, I think, overall.
Yeah, I mean, I've got the first vaccine. Once I get my second vaccine, it's not like I'm stripping off my mask and going out and like licking telephone poles or something. I'm still gonna be very careful about everything I do, and I'm still gonna keep distance, and I'm still gonna wear my mask because the science still is out. It's not nothing is 100%, and we're learning as we go along, as a society and as a business. We're learning from data that keeps coming in and mistakes that we've made.
Well, we will look back and we'll get a better idea of where things go. Katie, we're not going to wait 5 years to reconvene. You guys plan to come back. We'll see how things develop over the next.
I mean, it's been almost exactly 1 year since, or the first time we gathered. It's a yearly anniversary.
We'll check back in. Guys, thanks for taking the time today to talk this through. Good seeing everybody.
Thank you.
Good seeing everybody.
Good to see y'all.
Listeners, welcome back. And thanks for your patience over the winter hiatus. I've got enough episodes in the pipeline to maintain a weekly schedule for the reasonable future, and I'll most likely publish multiple episodes per week as we get closer to the Oscars. If you enjoyed last year's coverage of the technical awards, we're planning to do something similar this year as well. As always, your feedback is welcome. You can send email comments to skid, S-K-I-D, at belowtheline1word.biz. That's B-I-Z. Please rate us wherever you get your podcast. It helps us reach new listeners. And new listeners, I'd encourage you to peruse our past seasons, see if anything else sparks your interest. If you're on Facebook, you can find photos and other behind-the-scenes materials at Podcast Below the Line. And finally, you can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram. It's on Pod Below the Line. Thanks to Curtis Five for our music and John Wan for our logo. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Thanks again for listening. Be safe out there.